Hi everyone! Ever since I got back from Italy, I've just been craving some focaccia bread. So for this one, I made it with some rosemary and some roasted garlic, and as you can see, it has a wonderful, nice and crispy crust. It takes a little bit of time, but it's so delicious to make. Let's get on to the recipe. Now the first step that I do is I bloom my yeast. I used about 1 cup of boiling water and 1 cup of room temperature water to make kind of lukewarm water, and then I added about 2 tablespoons of yeast. I used active dry yeast because it lasts a little bit longer in my fridge, and then I just spinned it around a little bit and I let it sit on my counter for about 15 minutes before starting with the rest of my ingredients. For this recipe, I added 4 cups of regular all-purpose flour. You can use bread flour, it will make the recipe a little bit more chewier, but this is what I had on hand. And then I added about 2 teaspoons of salt. I combined my flour and salt, and then I added my yeast mixture with my water slowly and surely until the dough was a little bit moist. Once the dough was completely combined, I just topped it off with about 1 tablespoon of olive oil. This recipe uses a lot of oil in this entire process, so don't worry right now about it. And then I just covered it with some plastic wrap and put it in my refrigerator overnight. I highly recommend this because then it gives the dough a wonderful flavor, and truly you can set this out for maybe 2 to 3 hours, but my preference is overnight or even longer. The next day, I poured about 2 tablespoons of olive oil into a 9 by 13 pan, and then I just spread it all around before adding in my dough. The dough rose a good amount, but I still want it to rise again on the counter, so I just placed my dough in the pan, spreading it all over the edges, and then I let it rise for another 2 hours. About an hour in, I preheated my oven to 375 degrees so then I can start roasting my garlic. For this recipe, I used half a head of garlic, so I simply just chopped it in half, and then I placed it in some aluminum foil and roasted it for about an hour. After about an hour, you want the cloves to be squishy, not burnt, so I think these ones turned out perfectly. Then I raised my heat up to 425 degrees and preheat my oven while I started working on my bread. As you can see, after about 2 hours, my dough expanded to the size of the pan, and I had my garlic on hand for later, which as you can see is really nice and soft and toasty. And so I took about 1 tablespoon of olive oil and added it to the top of my bread. You could use more, mine just looked a little bit oily as it is, and then with my hands, I simply just poked a couple holes. Using my garlic on hand, I kind of just broke it up into little pieces and then spread it around my dough, making sure that a little bit got almost everywhere, and then I kind of poked those in as well. And then I added about 1 tablespoon worth of rosemary to the top of my focaccia, making sure to spread it out, in addition to adding about 1 teaspoon of really flaky salt. Then I baked it about 35 minutes, but please adjust based on your temperature of your oven. After removing from my oven, I let it sit for about 10 minutes before cutting into it to let it cool. As you can see, the focaccia looked perfectly golden. I then just sliced it into about 12 pieces with a nice bread knife. If you don't have one, I highly recommend getting one. And then I just served it with a little bit of butter, but feel free to serve it with olive oil and balsamic if you want a more authentic sauce. So yeah, that's basically how I make my focaccia at home, inspired by Italy. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Goodbye!